Be discussing for my narrated presentation clinical assessments. So, first, I just wanted to mention how interesting I think it is that psychologists and clinicians, or whoever the person is that is conducting this clinical assessment, how they are able to use different methods of interviewing, and essentially they all are able to successfully, or for the most part, come to a diagnosis that will, you know, change someone's life, because ultimately that's what a diagnosis does. It improves, if anything, a person's ability to function in society. So, the first part that I wanted to discuss is what is a clinical assessment? And the reason I provided this is because although we explore clinical assessments in our textbooks and through the lectures that are provided online, I wanted to include something that would um, be able to be seen by pretty much anyone, and with a vague understanding of clinical assessments and abnormal psychology, they would be able to understand what the main point is in um, performing a clinical assessment. Like, what are the key components, or, what, just in general, what's the point? So, a clinical assessment, it's a form of gathering information about a person. So, it offers insight into how they think, how they see themselves, how they see the world. Um, and I read on different websites and different um, videos. So I really liked how something I read. I'm not sure if it was an article or a website. There was just so much, but one of the sources referred to a clinical assessment as a conversation with a purpose. So I like that answer because when you talk to your loved ones or your best friend, whoever it may be, um, people often assume that that's a form of treatment, not necessarily here you're gonna feel better, but release. I guess release is a better word. So when they talk to their loved ones or their best friend, not that you don't love your best friend, but uh, when you talk to that person in your life who holds importance, they can often, provide relief in the sense that you're able to just talk about your feelings. Maybe you just can open up with that one person. But a clinical assessment is very important because that person on the opposite end of you, they're using a wide um, basis of knowledge to infer and interpret things about you that you may not know, and I guess would be referred to as the unconscious mind. So it's very important to distinguish the purpose of a clinician or psychologist conducting a clinical assessment. So for our different types of clinical assessment, we were offered three choices. So we have the Rorschach ink blot test, we have the thematic apperception test, and we have the Minnesota multifaceted personality inventory. So again, this narrated presentation was made with the intentions of being able to be viewed by pretty much anyone with a vague knowledge. So I just want to very briefly cover them. So obviously the Rorschach ink blot test, different images with ink drops dropped on there, folded in half, so you get different images. Uh-oh. All right. So then we have the thematic apperception test, where you have a lot of, well, 30 to be specific, black and white images, where in both of these, the patient is asked to just reveal what they see. For the thematic apperception test, the person is also asked to reveal how they think this person is feeling, what's going on, what led up to it, things of that nature. And then the Minnesota multifaceted personality inventory, I know it's a lot to spit out that fast, but this, and so I provided a list of questions that would be found on this type of test, so, or I guess interview. This form of clinical assessment is just a very long list of questions, and based on how the person answers, there are different categories that will, be, I guess, measured. They'll be measured to reveal certain aspects of this person's uh, mind. So for this assignment, I decided to go with the Rorschach Inkbook test and the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. So for the Rorschach Inkbook test, I can't say that my decision to pick this one was unbiased, or I'm sorry, that it was, yes, was not biased, because I'm very interested in different types of shows and SVU and CIS, and I commonly find this method somewhere in the mix of it. So immediately upon learning about it through this class, I recognized it, and so I took a liking, I took an interest as to what this really is. So I thought it'd be interesting to discuss. So for the strengths, I have patients can interpret freely, and what I mean by that is, obviously, however these images are depicted, people are able to just see what they want to see and literally say that whatever they see. So if you see a monkey playing drums, which is what I happen to have seen in one of the pictures, you can say that, and based on that answer, a psychologist or a clinician is able to interpret different things about your mind or the way you think, and that's pretty awesome. The way that people are just able to be free, and okay, so yeah, so still used today. So what that means is how the test is still used today offers insight into its validity. So obviously, this test would not be used still if it did not prove to be successful in a number of cases. Um, and actually, interesting enough, um, interviews, well, I guess experiments based on interviews found that 85 to 99% of interviews are able to successfully associate disorders to the person that was interviewed using the Rorschach. So that definitely offers insight into this method's validity and reliability. So for the weaknesses, I found that there's no established relationship between the interviewer and the patient, and I think that's important to have. I know that this is used as an initial form of assessment, but ultimately, how can someone feel comfortable when they don't really, there's not much dialogue really going on there? I mean, when I imagine the scenario in my head, I pretty much play out a patient, making their guesses, and an interviewer on the other end just saying, mm-hmm, yeah, what else do you see? And I feel like that's not enough. So I think that the Rorschach ink blood test could be used in a combination that can offer more information about this person. So I think that maybe I guess I can call it a mini interview. So if someone was to meet with their interviewer or their psychologist and have a mini interview, maybe 10-15 minutes, where they're just able to discuss who they are and what are their interests and different things like that, and be just feel comfortable to open up, that maybe when they do this Rorschach ink block test, they can have a broader mind. Well, this goes for the interviewer and the patient. They can have a broader mind in how these questions are being used. Another weakness that I also found was that there's no standardization. So if I'm assessing a patient, although obviously I'm not at that level of education, I think how I would interpret it is obviously going to be different than how you interpret it, or the person that you see next, how they would possibly interpret it. And so there's no standardization, there's no method, there's no measurement, and that can question the validity when, although there's a successful rate of diagnosis, there's no standardization. And I think in a field where you're ultimately diagnosing people with mental disorders or phobias or different things like that, it's very important to have some type of measurement being used. So that's it for the Rorschach. I believe I'm saying it right. Next, we have the Minnesota Multifaceted Personality Inventory. So the reason I chose this one is also from personal experience. I've happened to have taken similar tests. So although I've never taken this one, when I read about it and when I watch videos and stuff like that, it reminded me of when I was joining the army and you're given the ASVAB. So if anyone knows what that is, it's a series of questions that are computerized, and they're just, it feels like they're never ending. And so accompanied by the ASVAB is a personality test. And you know what, now that I think about it, it might be something so similar to this, if not the same thing. So it asks me a series of questions, and a lot of them are contradictory, so it caused a lot of confusion. I didn't know how to answer. If they asked, well, do you like cats or dogs? And you answer dogs, and then it asks, do you hate dogs or cats? It's like, well, I don't really hate anything. So, you get the sense of there was a lot of confusion. I didn't know how to answer those questions. So, that's it. Just reminded me of that. So that's why I chose this one. It was just something I was familiar with. So the strengths, I included how this form can predict when someone answers falsely. So I was reading, I'm not sure again from which source, there was just so many that I read and watched that, but one mentioned how the test can basically tell when someone lies, because obviously there's a pattern of maybe all truths, all false, all maybes, or whatever the third option was. I don't remember at the moment. So that's good. There is a scale for this. So there was the 10 clinical scales that were used that offered insight into different, possible disorders and phobias, things like that. And so the way that this method can predict and measure, it offers a lot of validity and reliability, because this method obviously has what is needed to establish that. And then also I thought it was very interesting how the Minnesota, or I guess I'll just say MMPI, has a version 2 that's available for, or a resource for adolescents. It broadens the availability to different people. So obviously one of the weaknesses is cultural biasness. Okay, so I remember taking the NREMT, so that's National Registry for Emergency Medical Technicians. Excuse me. So how the test functioned was that you were asked a series of questions, and if it found weaknesses, the test basically altered, and it focused more on that area to see really how much you do or do not know. So when it came to cardiovascular, if I was weak, it would explore further, what does this person know about cardiovascular? Because obviously there's some trouble there. And so I thought that that's something that can be applied to the MMPI, in the sense that there's obviously a cultural bias. So if the test can predict someone's personality, it can alter the questions that would give insight and be more relatable to the person taking the test. I don't know how realistic that is, but obviously if it can be applied to something like the NRMT, I'm sure that eventually technology and psychologists can create something that would be successful in this way. One of the other weaknesses is that the test is just simply too long. There's, I believe, 561 questions, and that is just, I can't imagine sitting through that, and I don't know anyone who would want to.